Now we have more to argue about, though, because, Jesse, you put out a column that generates quite a bit of buzz every year. The top 25 coaches in college football, and you've taken cracks at, the top 10 group of 5 coaches. You've done quite a few variations on this. But this is one of those years when Nick Saban retires, Jim Harbaugh goes to the NFL, makes number 1 very easy. Makes everything else very hard. Uh-oh, I think we lost Jesse's sound. I don't know what happened there. That is that's not good. But I can talk about this a little bit because one, I'm glad. There, we're back, Jesse. Okay. Hi.
Oh, I don't know. I guess my pods got disconnected. All good. So I had Kirby number 1 a year ago. But like you said, Jim Harbaugh leaving, that creates a big vacuum. What's going to happen there maybe at number 2? A lot of debate. ESPN released their top 10. They didn't even have Brian Kelly in the top 10. I'm pretty high on LSU's head coach. I think it's kind of much like Sarkisian. It's going to be kind of a matter of when, not if, he eventually wins a national championship. So he with what he's done at all these different levels of the sport, still has 2 10-win seasons the last couple of years with the Tigers, what he did at Notre Dame. He's kind of a pretty solid number 2 there. Super high on Kalen DeBoer. Sark was a tier 5 coach a year ago, Andy, on your former with your buddies there at The Athletic there in their head coach rankings. Tier 5. I mean, like way down the list.
Because he never had a really good year.
Exactly. I'm not quibbling with it at all. And I wrote a column that just about a week ago that it's his rise could at least give hope to fans like here in Gainesville, Florida. Billy Napier, some other Mario Cristobal at Miami. Just because you haven't done it doesn't mean you won't do it. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Sark had never won 10 games. Finally, gets the monkey off his back, and now he's seen as one of the highest, or is one of the highest paid coaches in the sport.
Well, and the thing with Sark, and I've been pretty high on Texas this offseason, which if you've been watching me for a while, I was pretty down on Texas for quite some time. It feels to me like Sark has gotten Texas to do the things that it was not doing, like developing players for the NFL, turning those recruits who Texas has always gotten highly rated recruiting classes, but turning them into even better players when they leave. And that's something Texas didn't do for like 12 straight years. They're doing that now. They are deep on the lines of scrimmage. It feels like they're prioritizing the right things. It feels sustainable. And that's why I don't necessarily quibble with where you have Sark right now, even after only 1 good year, because it feels like he's developed something sustainable there. Now, if they just fall off the map, that's a different story. But I don't think they will, because I feel like he took took the lessons from working with Nick Saban in terms of program building. But like it feels like even if you put a replacement level coach in there right now, this roster is going to win you 9 or 10 games.
Well, the biggest thing that they've changed is, I think, their offensive line development. I mean, that's been so key. And then they did lose Bo Davis, but they also, as we mentioned, T'Vondre Sweat, Murphy, you had him in your first round mock. They've rebuilt the lines of scrimmage. Texas has had plenty of playmakers, but then they've gotten the best out of those guys as well. Last year, Bijan was their first round offensive player since Vince Young to get drafted. Now they could have 1 or 2 this year. Quinn Ewers. We saw what Arch did in the spring game. There are no shortage of weapons there. You go out and get Isaiah Bond. I mean, I am sky high on Texas this year as well. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it's kind of them, Georgia, and Ohio State as kind of a tier 1, and then a lot of teams kind of behind them. Who else? Did you have any quibbles with the top 10? Or I was
fascinated by the Kalen DeBoer. I actually agree with you on Kalen DeBoer, but I think most people are not going to agree with you on this. The putting him at number 3, because I look at Kalen DeBoer's overall resume. he has won it's actually the same as Brian Kelly. It's the same thing you're talking about with Brian Kelly, where the person has won everywhere. They've been successful at every level. Like, you take what is baseline success at the NAIA level, at the Group of Five level, at the power conference, but not one of the power conference level. Like, Kalen DeBoer's been above the line everywhere he's been. Brian Kelly above the line everywhere he's been.
He doesn't lose, Andy. He's lost 12 times in his life. I mean, it's just remarkable. He's 12-2 versus top 25 teams. Again, I kind of weigh what have you done and what is your future? Because, if this was just about what have you done, Dabo is going to be, number 2 on everybody's list. But this is about both the past, the present, and the future. There certainly has been some pushback on Kalen DeBoer at 3, but I'm sky high on him. I think he's clearly one of the best head coaches in the sport, and you know who else believed that? Alabama's athletic director, which is why he's succeeding the GOAT there.
So a different Andrew, other than me, has a question. There's no Dan Lanning in the top 10. That's a shame. You had Dan Lanning at 11, and
hardest coach to rank.
Yeah,
I think he's the hardest coach to rank.
He's doing all the things he's supposed to do, except has not cracked through with the right wins. Like, probably should have won a Pac-12 title in one of his first 2 years at Oregon because he had the most talented team. He does not have the most talented team in the Big Ten, but he may have the second most talented team.
Yeah, I love Dan Lanning, and if you were ranking this list, Andy, I think in terms of who would you have as your head coach over one or the other, so almost like a trade value column. Like if your school called another school, where Dan Lanning would be much higher on this list because he would be, he's probably on the short list of 2 or 3 guys that you would have behind Kirby. But he's got to do it now. And that's not exactly what this ranking is. And so he'll certainly find his way into the top 10 in due time if he has a big year. Oregon right behind that, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State trio that we mentioned. Oregon is right there with what they've kind of assembled via both high school recruiting, the portal. You have that combination there, little quarterback insurance with not only, Dylan Gabriel, but you bring in Dante Moore. So really, really like what the Ducks have to offer in 24.
All right, so you got Ryan Day at number 4, and Ryan Day is the lightning rod. Like, you got, if you didn't see it the other day, I may retweet it again. There's a Michigan fan who essentially wrote a Broadway score making fun of Ryan Day and recorded it professionally. Like, it's incredible. Even if I was Ryan Day, I would laugh at it just because of the effort involved. But Ryan Day is a lightning rod because he has been, by any objective measure, extremely successful at Ohio State. But you'll have rival fans say, well, Urban Meyer handed him something ready-made.
Third base, Andy. Third base.
Yep. And you'll have Ohio State fans saying, well, maybe Jim Harbaugh was right about the third base thing. Like, they are, I think Ohio State fans are probably more conflicted about Ryan Day than anybody. So let me ask you this, Jesse, because 4 is a controversial place to put Ryan Day. But if he were 1-2 against Michigan in the past 3 years, would anybody question it at all?
If you make a field goal against Georgia, you probably win.
You have a national title. Yeah.
Yeah. So the margins are that thin. So I like, again, he rarely loses. He doesn't have these games where we're suddenly Rutgers is beating us, or we're going down to Illinois and losing in Champaign. Ohio State wins the majority of the games they're supposed to. They, unlike Penn State, do also beat some top 10, top 15 teams. They're on a skid versus Michigan. This is the season they absolutely have to get it done. Your former colleague there, Ari Wasserman, would say that game's even more important than winning, the Big Ten championship or the national title. I don't know about that, but
I don't think it is, especially in the new format.
Well, but they exactly. But you know what? He needs to win that game, and he's made every stride this offseason that suggests Ryan Day gets it. He's won a lot of games doing it his way, but now he said, "Hey, I need to cede some of these responsibilities." So he takes a more CEO approach, goes and gets Bill O'Brien to be his offensive coordinator. O'Brien leaves for the head coaching job. What does he do? Dials up and says, "Oh, I got Chip Kelly waiting on the line." Boom. He's pushed the chips all in to be aggressive with the roster. Not only landing guys like Caleb Downs, which is no one's going to turn that down. Quinshawn Judkins, Will Howard, but then he's like, oh yeah, Julian Sains is going to get in the portal, even though we already have 5-star Aaron Nolan, even though we already have this deep quarterback room. We're going to just add even more talent to the roster and just let it play out. And however it plays out, it plays out. But competition wins. And so I just really like what Ohio State has done this offseason for as many wins as Day already has on his resume too. I think he merits, being there in the top 5.
So you've got Mike Norvell at 7. You've got Lane Kiffin at 10. Was there any consideration of bringing these guys higher because they've figured out how to do it in this environment? Like, I don't think there's any guys that have been better at doing it in this particular environment than those two. They have elevated their programs. Like, Norvell's program has been in this space before. Florida State has been dominant, has been one of the best programs in the country before, but it was a deep hole he had to dig them out of, and he used the rule changes to make that happen. Meanwhile, Lane Kiffin has Ole Miss in a place where maybe it hasn't been because he's been able to work the system better.
Yeah, I was tempted by Norvell, but it was hard for me. I think if Florida State wins the ACC again this year, I think he leapfrogs Dabo. But the Clemson won the title a year ago, so they've split it the last 2 years. Let's see what happens kind of in the rubber match this year. I didn't really have any consideration to move Lane any higher than he was. I love what Lane has done in Oxford, but I think the next step for him, much like James Franklin at Penn State, circumstances different, but you got to start beating some teams that maybe you're not supposed to, and so it's nice to rack up a lot of wins, but where are these top 25 wins? Can you pull off an upset or two? Ole Miss's schedule sets up this year where if they do that once or twice, maybe it's a Georgia, maybe it's an LSU. Suddenly you're looking at it, going to a college football playoff, maybe making the SEC championship game for the first time in school history. So there's a lot of potential there for Lane and Norvell, I think, to kind of climb up this list.
So 2 guys I'm looking at, I'm wondering if we've seen them as high as we're ever going to see them. Dabo and Lincoln Riley. Like, has Lincoln Riley crested? Because I think we do this 3 years ago. Lincoln Riley's in the top 3 or 4.
3. Yeah.
Even with Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh working. And now it's like, okay, the longer this goes, the more you say, will this guy ever figure it out on the lines of scrimmage? Will he ever figure out how to have a good defense opposite his amazing offense? We'll see with the new defensive staff this year. But it's interesting because this is the first time I can remember a Lincoln Riley team that you weren't really excited about going into the season.
What and why is that, Andy? Because this is the first time he doesn't have a fighter pilot at quarterback. If you saw some highlights from that spring game, it was not it. Now, Miller Moss had a monster bowl game and, got that ringing endorsement from Riley. But this is, whether it's Maeva or Moss, I'm not sure that, considering what Riley's worked with at the position over the last, almost 10 years or so, 7, 8 years, he doesn't have that this year. And that could be problematic because that being Caleb Williams and some of these other guys have masked over the fact that Lincoln Riley's teams just don't play defense. Maybe they will with DeAnton Lynn and the new staff there, but you're right. He could be a guy that this may be, a swan song season in terms of him being in the top 10 of these head coach rankings.
Now, Dabo, I'm not sure I would have put Dabo even in the top 10 right now. I think the refusal to use the transfer portal in the year of our Lord 2024 is disqualifying. And
disqualifying.
I'm not sure he's ever he's got to show us he can get back here because he has sort of put a stake in the ground, like, I'm going to do it this way. And if you can't do it this year, I think we're going to be pretty sure you're never going to do it again, because unless you actually want to build your roster the way every other team in America builds its roster now.
Who would you put in there if you take Dabo out?
Lance Leipold. Lance Leipold, because of degree of difficulty, he has been spectacular.
And I had him at 12.
At Kansas. Yeah, exactly. And I think I'd put him in the top 10 just because that job was so hard. Like, it looked hopeless. Think about when the guy got hired. The guy got hired
after spring practice.
Right. The spring game's the next day, I think, when he got hired. And within 2 years, they're competitive. Like, they won 9 games last year. They have an exciting quarterback. He
beat Sark in year 1.
They did. Like, you go into this season excited about Kansas football. And look, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State doing a great job too. Did a great job at North Dakota State. But I think that degree of difficulty you saw for Leipold, like, if he can keep doing this, keep making them better, let's say he makes them where they're competitive in the Big 12, like really legitimately competing for a Big 12 title. Like, that is the hardest coaching job to do. I always say, the greatest coach of all time is Bill Snyder because of what he took over at Kansas State and what he turned it into. And Lance Leipold, what he took over at Kansas was as bad as what Bill Snyder took over at Kansas State.
And they're going to be fun this year, Andy, because they return, I think, more production offensively than any team in the country. So it's not just
and
Jalen
2 NFL
Daniels
corners
back.
If they can keep them, if the tampering doesn't snag one, but if they can keep them,
exactly.
they got some dudes.
There were some folks that were upset about him. There were some folks upset that I had Jamie Chadwell so high.
I think Jamie Chadwell's a good coach. Now here's the Jamie Chadwell thing, and we're never going to know this until somebody sacks up and hires Jamie Chadwell in a power conference, because the reason he hasn't been hired in a power conference is he's never worked in one. Remember, he's been a head coach most of his career. North Greenville in Division II, Charleston Southern, Coastal Carolina Liberty. So he's never been like South Carolina's receivers coach where he had to go recruit at that level. And most of his assistants have not recruited at that level.
He's extremely loyal. And so he's had a staff that's been made up of his guys for years and years. Is there a guy that's not in the top 25 that I whiffed on to you?
I like this list. I feel pretty good about it. Like Jeff Brom at 20, I think is a good inclusion because his teams are never not above average. It feels like Jeff Traylor at UTSA. I might go a little higher on Eli Drinkwitz, but maybe I'm being a prisoner of the moment because I think I do remember last year when we were saying, wait, what about
make or break year?
Yeah. Why are you extending this guy? He just won 6 games. What's going on? I still think Dave Clawson, even though they had a bad year, has worked miracles at Wake Forest. So I probably would have kept him in the top 25. So
he was a tough cut. I cut Stoops too.
We're gonna have
a fringe cut.
Well, speaking of Stoops and the job he was up for, and then the Regents rebelled and he didn't get it. I think Mike Elko is going to be on this list next year.
That's a strong prediction. I had him in the just miss list. I mean, two seasons at Duke, you go 16-9, I believe. He's a heck of a coach. And it's been crazy to kind of spin this forward, and it's been crazy to kind of watch from afar as we're all, getting the intel from the spring, kind of getting some ducks in a row. Man, it has been so quiet comparatively, especially out of College Station this spring.
With good reason.
With good reason, exactly. And I just think that, they're doing the work and not exactly puffing their chest about it. So that schedule, A&M, if they can get Connor Wegman right, with what they've done in the portal, kind of supplementing some holes, they have a chance to maybe scare some teams and win more games, I think, than most people anticipate this fall.
When we had Elko on the show about 2 months ago, he mentioned that the talent level was not what everybody thinks it is there. And I was thinking, maybe that's just coach speak. He's just trying to light a fire. But talking to people, I get the sense that when they got in there, they looked around at the roster and they said, you know what? The Jimbo staff was chasing stars. They were not necessarily building a cohesive team. They were saying, well, we can get 9. I don't think it was 9. I think it was maybe 7. But we can get all of these top 100 defensive linemen in the same class. Well, how often do you sign that many defensive linemen in one class? Like, there is this thing called class balance in your position rooms and that sort of thing. And they did not necessarily have that. And so I think a lot of the work that's been done this offseason has been trying to fill holes at certain positions where they were thin.
Well, and they filled it at defensive line because you go out and get Nick Scorton from Purdue, who might be the most impactful defensive transfer in the entire country this season. I mean, he was a monster in their spring game.
Who's from Bryan, Texas, by the way.
Yep. And so you have him playing opposite of Shamar Stewart. I mean, that could be one of the best pass rushing duos in the country.
Yeah, I think the quiet out of College Station by design. But yeah, and the Mark Stoops not being on the list is interesting because he's being paid a lot more than most of the people on this list. You know, and this is why I say Kentucky's the best job in the country, because they will pay you like a national championship coach, but they don't expect you to even compete for the conference title.
They don't, but they probably would like a little bit better results than they've got in the last 2 years, where it's kind of been a little bit of a backslide there. So we'll see if he got the OC right.
Well, they saved some money not having to pay a $33 million buyout for John Calipari. So, got a little.
It's a football school, Andy.
It is a football school. Mark Stoops won the war. Let's be real here.
Exactly. If you're not going to pony up, then you've declared we are a football school now. So
that's exactly right. Mark Stoops won that one, and it's funny because you read about what happened with John Calipari and that incident where he was saying we need the money now. We got to rebuild our practice facility. And Mark Stoops kind of shoots back at him because Cal had said, well, we did all this for football. Like, Stoops won the turf war there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Don't be messing with the man's bourbon. He's there for the long haul.
Well, he wasn't going to be if A&M hired him, but he is now. So, Jesse, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.